Why must woman walk alone? Because heaven has never been in the business of producing noise. It is in the business of creating depth. Separation is not punishment. It is preparation. And when God is preparing a woman for divine assignment, He does not begin with the crowd. Become the offensive. He begins with isolation. Look closely and you will find that throughout Scripture, every woman destined to shift history was first separated from the familiar. Hagar had to flee into the wilderness. Ruth had to leave Moab. Esther was taken from her people. Mary had to carry the promise in silence. Why? Because identity that is built in the crowd is fragile. It performs, comes. But identity that is shaped in solitude becomes unshakable. It knows who it is even when no one is clapping. There is a dangerous misconception in society today that if you are alone, you are unloved, or worse, unworthy. But the divine record tells a different story. In fact, some of the most loved, trusted, and chosen vessels of God spent their most critical seasons walking alone. Aloneness is not a curse. It is a crucible. It burns off the need to be validated, to be seen, to be accepted by man. And in the ashes of that burning, God reveals the only validation that truly matters: His voice, His word, His call. You see, the offense of, there is a season in every chosen woman's life when God silences the noise around her so that she may finally hear the sound of her own soul. This silence is not emptiness. It is intentional. It is a space where He pulls her out of the systems and structures that shaped her image but broke her essence. It is where He detoxes her from comparison, from performance, from people pleasing. Come the offense of, God will remove her from the crowd not to humiliate her, but liberate her from the applause that made her feel valuable and the opinions that made her feel small. When God calls a woman to walk alone, it is because He wants her to recognize herself in His mirror, the offense of, not the world's. And the mirror of God never flatters, it reveals, it does not inflate, it purifies. It is there in the silence, the offense of, in the sacred loneliness, that He begins to show her who she truly is. Beyond the makeup, beyond the degrees, beyond the relationships, beyond the trauma. He shows her the warrior, the intercessor, the prophetess, the leader that was buried beneath the expectations of others. Understand this: to walk alone is not to walk aimlessly. It is to walk deliberately, even if invisibly. It is to walk with God while man overlooks. And that is where the true test lies, because many women can walk boldly when affirmation surrounds them, but only a woman chosen by God can walk confidently when no one sees her, no one praises her, and no one understands her. That walk, that lonely walk, is not empty. It is full of divine activity. Angels are assigned, destiny is unfolding, character is being forged, and identity is being written in the ink of heaven. Think of it this way: even a seed must go underground before it blossoms. It is buried in darkness. It is unseen. But in that dark place, something is breaking. Something is taking root. Something is growing that no eye can see. The same is true for the woman God has set apart. Her isolation is not the end of her story. It's the beginning of her becoming. She is being planted, not buried. And when she rises, she will not need to convince anyone of her worth. Her fruit will speak. Her walk will speak. Her presence will speak. Too often, we think elevation begins on the stage. No, it begins in a cave. It begins in the quiet. It begins in the heartbreak, in the rejection, in the overlooked season where God says, now I have your full attention. That is where He pours the oil. That is where He speaks mysteries. That is where He teaches her not to be swayed by emotion, but to be anchored in purpose. He shows her how to stand, not because the world is watching, but because the heaven is expecting. So yes, God's woman must walk alone, not become offensive, not forever, but for a while, long enough to unlearn the lies and remember her birthright. Long enough to be emptied of pride and filled with purpose. Long enough to no longer be defined by who left, but by who remains. And that is God. When God begins to elevate a woman, He also begins to isolate her from what no longer serves her spirit. This is not always physical isolation. It is often emotional. She may still be in the room, but she no longer feels connected to it. She hears the conversation, but no longer relates to it. She sees the crowd, but the crowd no longer sees her. Something in her has shifted, and the shift is internal before it ever becomes external. That is the signature of divine transition. Alpha, God disconnects her emotionally from what she used to depend on, not to punish her, but to prepare her for a higher realm of clarity and calling. This disconnection is not accidental, it is deliberate. It is heaven's strategy. It was before God entrusts a woman with influence, he must detach her from the need for approval. He begins to expose the hollowness of the familiar. The friends she once confided in now sound surface level. The offense of the habits she once indulged in now feel beneath her. The environment she once enjoyed now feel restrictive. The offense of, this is not pride, it is progression. When a woman's purpose begins to awaken, her appetite begins to change. She is no longer content with crumbs when she was made for a feast. Offense of God begins to make her uncomfortable in average places so she can rise to her anointed position. One of the great spiritual illusions is that growth will feel good. It doesn't. Growth feels like grief. It was every promotion demands a separation. God cannot take her into the next level while she clings to what made her feel safe in the last one. And so he begins to agitate her atmosphere. The jokes don't land the same. The music no longer inspires. The relationships that once defined her begin to dissolve. It is as if heaven is cleaning house, not with violence, but quiet discontent. God will allow her to lose interest in what is not eternal. The offense of and this loss of emotional connection is the very evidence that she is being prepared for divine alignment. You see, purpose has a sound. And once you've heard it, the noise of the word loses its volume. When a woman begins to hear the whisper of divine purpose, she cannot go back to shouting in shallow rooms. She walks alone not because she despises others, but because she is now governed by a different frequency. Her conversations become more intentional. Her boundaries become more sacred. Her time becomes more precious because she understands that emotional energy is not infinite. And if she is going to carry the weight of heaven's assignment, she cannot waste her oil entertaining what no longer carries spiritual weight. But make no mistake, this detachment is painful, it is lonely, it is confusing, it feels like loss, but it is actually liberation. With an offense of what God is doing is pruning. And pruning is not punishment, it is preparation for fruitfulness. He is trimming the branches of her life so that her spirit may carry more, see more, discern more. Of it, God is not just removing people. He is removing the need to be needed. He is breaking the addiction to toxic attachments. He is pulling her out of emotional cycles that kept her bound to mediocrity and placing her on a path of emotional maturity. It is in this sacred disconnection that she learns the power of alignment over attachment. She begins to choose silence over gossip, solitude over performance, healing over attention. Her spirit becomes sensitive to who drains her, who delays her, and who disguises themselves as destiny. This is not paranoia. This is wisdom, because when you carry something sacred, the offense of you cannot afford to be casual with your company. The wrong connection at the right moment can delay a divine assignment. And Kam loves her too much to let her be distracted by counterfeit comfort. So he teaches her in the dark. He walks with her through the discomfort of letting go. He sits with her when no one calls, when no one checks in, when no one invites her. And in that solitude, she begins to feel something deeper than attention. She feels alignment. She feels God's presence in ways she never did before. She sees his hand in details she once overlooked. She begins to realize that emotional isolation is not a dead end, it is a doorway. And when she walks through that door, she walks lighter. Not because everything around her changed, but because everything within her did. She no longer chases what rejects her. She no longer begs to be included. She no longer questions her worth based on who stays or who leaves. Because she has tasted alignment. And once a woman has walked with God in the garden of emotional clarity, she cannot go back to the desert of emotional compromise. There is a reason the woman chosen by God often finds herself hidden. not silenced, not discarded, but deliberately concealed. She is not overlooked by accident, she is preserved by design, because anointing, by its very nature, attracts warfare. It is a spiritual law. To be set apart is to be set in the crosshairs of the enemy. And so, when God places his hand upon a woman, he often begins by pulling her away from the noise, not because she is unworthy of exposure, but because the weight she carries cannot be entrusted to public opinion. She must walk alone, because what God is building within her cannot be contaminated by the agendas of others. The tragedy of premature exposure is that it invites voices before she learns to recognize God's voice. And when a woman has not been trained in discernment, she may confuse flattery with favor and attention with alignment. God in his wisdom prevents this by placing her in obscurity. He hides her where the cameras cannot reach, where applause cannot echo, because in the silence she learns the sound of heaven. She learns the weight of her words. She learns to kneel before she ever learns to stand. And when she finally does stand, she does so with substance, not showmanship. There is something sacred about the season where no one sees you but God. It is in that place that he teaches her to rely not on visibility, but on vision. The world may measure success by spotlight, but heaven measures it by surrender. And surrender cannot be faked in public. It is forged in private. When a woman walks alone, it is there that she learns not just to carry her oil, but to guard it. Because not every hand that reaches out wants to bless. It may want to drain. Not every platform is a promotion. Some are traps dressed in applause. And so God in his mercy says, not yet. Let me teach you in secret before they see you in strength. Consider the pattern. Before David ruled, he was alone in the field with sheep. Before Moses led a nation, he wandered in a wilderness. Before Jesus began his public ministry, he was driven into the desert. And before many women of valor ever stepped into their destiny, they endured seasons where they felt invisible. But it was never about neglect. It was always about nurturing, because purpose must be protected in its infancy. It must be covered until it is mature enough to survive scrutiny. The woman must walk alone, because the weight of her calling cannot be stabilized by the shallow scaffolding of public opinion. Aloneness becomes her training ground. She learns how to fight spiritually without losing her softness emotionally. She learns how to pray until the atmosphere shifts. She learns how to stand when everything in her wants to fold. This is not just spiritual discipline, it is spiritual fortification. God is developing in her a backbone that does not depend on external validation. She does not need the crowd to tell her she is called. She knows it in her bones. And that knowing is born in the silence, not in the celebration. The world may not understand this process, but heaven honors it, because once she has walked through the fire of loneliness, through the valley of rejection, through the wilderness of hiddenness, she emerges not just strong, but sanctified. Her words carry authority because they were forged in authenticity. Her presence carries peace because she has warred in private. Her discernment is sharp because she has had to sit in silence and listen to heaven without distraction. And let me say this clearly, the woman who has been trained by God in solitude is a dangerous woman to the kingdom of darkness, because she is not easily manipulated. She is not impressed by titles. She does not move by impulse. She moves by instruction. She walks by revelation, not reputation. And that kind of woman must be trained without interference. That's why she walks alone, because God is guarding her from voices that would water down her conviction, from relationships that would dilute her focus, from atmospheres that would corrupt her integrity. It is not that she is antisocial or arrogant. It is that she has learned the cost of compromise. And once a woman has paid the price of divine training, she does not return to discount living. She walks differently because she has been forged differently. Not in the light of man's approval, but in the fire of God's presence.